The Dallas Cowboys have a problem. Not a major one, not yet, but a roster crunch is looming. After adding their 2025 draft class and signing a long list of undrafted free agents, the Cowboys currently have 95 players under their umbrella. That number clearly exceeds the league limit of 90, and yes, the draft picks, even if unsigned, count toward the total. Technically, Dallas gets a little leeway with a 91-player allowance, thanks to the NFL's International Player Pathway program. But even with that exception, someone's got to go. Not just one, not two. Multiple cuts are coming. And while most of them won't shock anyone, a few names might raise eyebrows, especially if the team wants to save cap space or make room for new talent they believe can contribute. So today, we're diving deep into the Cowboys' current roster situation, evaluating players on the bubble, and trying to identify who might be on the chopping block. We'll start by focusing on 4 notable players who are at risk, not necessarily because of lack of talent, but due to financial implications, draft additions, positional logjams, and yes, some underwhelming performances. Later, we'll touch on 10 other names that, quite frankly, wouldn't surprise anyone if they were released. As the team shapes its final 90-man group heading into OTAs and training camp, these decisions will become unavoidable. Let's start with one player who has been the subject of quiet trade buzz. He hasn't been cut yet, and that's telling. The Cowboys might be holding out for a last-minute trade partner. He carries a $1.18 million cap hit, and the potential savings from cutting him are around $1.1 million. Now, that seems like a nice chunk of change, until you realize that replacing him with a bottom roster player who costs around $1.03 million would only net the Cowboys about $70,000 in real savings. In the big picture, that's negligible. But sometimes teams don't just think about money. They think about roster flexibility and upside. And in that regard, this player has become expendable. The real reason he's still here might be tied to another 6th-round draft pick the Cowboys just made. One who plays the same position and carries a far more appealing price tag. Then there's another name that stands out purely for financial reasons. This player accounts for a whopping $3.407 million against the cap. Cutting him would free up almost that exact amount, $3.401 million in savings. That's not pocket change. That's enough to sign 2 veteran depth pieces or absorb an in-season trade if needed. And here's the kicker. His on-field impact hasn't justified the cost. Last season, he lost ground in the depth chart, and now, after the Cowboys added a significant number of linebackers both through free agency and the draft, his roster spot is no longer guaranteed. When we discuss draft winners and losers, this is one player you'd have to classify as a loser, not necessarily because of anything he did, but because of what the team did around him. Now, if you look back at the 2023 draft, it was packed with edge rushers and off-ball linebackers. But despite all that potential, this particular player underperformed in some key areas. He didn't bring much heat as a pass rusher, struggled to tally meaningful tackles for loss, and barely made any impact plays like forced fumbles or pass breakups. That lack of splash, especially on a defense that thrives on momentum, makes him replaceable. Combine that with the fact that the Cowboys already have multiple linebackers who excel on special teams, and suddenly you're asking yourself, is it really worth keeping the 5th best special teamer at linebacker if he costs $3 million more than someone else? Probably not. Let's be honest. These conversations are uncomfortable. No one wants to see a veteran who's worked hard get cut. But this is the NFL. It's a business. And the Cowboys have to get under the 90-man limit fast. Another name being tossed around is a former high draft pick who's now at crossroads. His contract isn't guaranteed, and he carries a cap hit of just over $1 million. That makes him easy to cut if needed. The coaching staff, new as they are, might want to give him a shot, see if they can salvage his talent. But if last year is any indication, it might be too late. He struggled in coverage, didn't offer much value on special teams, and seemed lost when asked to play multiple roles. If the Cowboys manage to stay healthy in the secondary, especially at cornerback, it's hard to justify keeping him around. And this is where things get really interesting. The Cowboys don't have a clear WR2 right now. That makes cutting receivers even trickier. One player who keeps popping up in these conversations is someone with just 18 receptions in 21 career games. He's known more for his blocking and special teams ability than his hands. Still, that kind of versatility has value, especially when the team needs guys who could do multiple things. He might end up sticking as the WR4 or WR5, but that depends heavily on how some of the new undrafted free agents perform in camp. Speaking of which, let's talk about that bottom tier of wideouts. The Cowboys brought in a handful of rookie receivers who weren't drafted but have upside. They also spent a draft pick on another player with a similar profile to someone already on the roster. The redundancy is obvious. You can't keep everyone. At some point, choices have to be made, and it usually comes down to who flashes during preseason games and joint practices. Depth is great, but if you've got 10 receivers and only 5 spots, there's going to be carnage. One receiver who might have the inside track is a slot guy who the new offensive staff seems intrigued by. He's shown flashes in camp before and fits a clear role. On the other hand, there's another wideout from a big-name school who hasn't done much yet, but has the kind of pedigree that usually buys you one more shot. Whether that's fair or not, we'll soon find out. And what about the offensive line? That room is packed. We're talking 3 full units plus extra bodies. Between draft picks, free agent signings, and developmental players from past years, there's no realistic way the Cowboys can keep everyone. One player in particular, a holdover from a previous regime, just hasn't earned consistent snaps. The additions around him might finally force the front office's hand. Same goes for a younger lineman who came in last year but barely saw the field. With so many options available, versatility will be key. If you can't play both guard and tackle, or center and guard, you're probably not making it past the second week of camp. And just for fun, as we continue to evaluate this roster, I want you to think like a video game GM. Rank the Cowboys' current roster on a scale of 1 to 99. Take into account the stars, the depth, the youth, the injury risks, everything. Drop your score in the comments and tell us who you'd keep, who you'd cut, and who you think is flying under the radar. If we're going to talk about who's next in line for the chopping block, we need to look deeper into the Cowboys' defensive depth chart. There's one position group that's gone from thin to crowded almost overnight: interior defensive line. The Cowboys have poured resources into bolstering that unit. They used premium draft capital, added free agents, and now have several young players they want to develop. And right in the middle of that logjam sits a former late-round pick who's been with the team a few years but hasn't cracked the rota. Let's not ignore how the new defensive scheme factors in here. With Mike Zimmer back in the building, the expectations on gap control, technique, and mental discipline just went through the roof. This isn't a system that lets you freelance or win with raw athleticism alone. Zimmer wants guys who know their assignment, understand leverage, and play like veterans, even if they're not. If you can't adapt to that quickly, you're going to get exposed in training camp. And there's a small group of players on the fringe who are going to find that out the hard way. Defensive ends who were drafted with upside but haven't developed. Linebackers who are athletic but still don't diagnose plays fast enough. Cornerbacks who can't play man or press. These aren't just issues. They're red flags when Zimmer's running the show. But let's pivot to a more high-profile name for a second. A player fans have mixed feelings about. He was drafted with real expectations, had flashes as a rookie, but never quite lived up to the hype. And now, after multiple coaching changes and scheme tweaks, he's just another body fighting for snaps. His contract is manageable, but cutting him would save real money, enough to sign a mid-tier veteran if they wanted. He got the tools, sure, but tools don't matter if they're not being used effectively. And with a couple of rookies already showing flashes during early workouts, he could be the odd man out unless something changes in a hurry. You want to talk about tough choices? Look at the running back room. Tony Pollard is gone. The Cowboys didn't spend high draft capital on the position, but they brought in multiple new faces. And that puts pressure on the holdovers, especially one back who was signed last offseason but didn't get many chances. The competition is fierce. There's a rookie people are buzzing about, plus a veteran who knows the system and plays on special teams. It's not a glamorous battle, but it's one that could have real implications come cut-down day. There are only so many carries to go around in preseason. If you don't make the most of your 6 or 7 touches, you're toast. That's just the reality. And let's be honest, special teams might end up deciding more roster spots than people realize. A lot of fans overlook that phase of the game. They get caught up in the offensive and defensive depth charts. But coaches? They're watching every rep on kickoff and punt coverage. There are safeties, corners, linebackers, and wide receivers who are right on the edge. They might not be great on offense or defense, but if they can fly down the field and make a tackle or block a punt, they're getting on that plane in September. A couple of the current bubble players didn't even log 100 special team snaps last year. That's a bad sign, especially when you've got hungry, undrafted rookies fighting for the same job, often at half the price. The tight end room is another one that's quietly competitive. You've got a clear starter, a second-year player the team loves, and a couple of veterans. That leaves 1 or 2 guys trying to claw their way onto the roster. They've flashed in practice before. One of them even had a solid preseason last year. But the numbers don't lie. You can't keep 5 tight ends unless someone also doubles as a fullback or elite special teamer. And even then, it's a stretch. They're not bad players, not by any means. But this league isn't about being good. It's about being better than the next guy. And when your contract isn't guaranteed, being just okay usually leads to walking papers. There's also a bit of mystery around the backup quarterback position. The starter is locked in, obviously, but behind him, there's a real debate brewing. One guy has experience but lacks arm strength. The other has tools but not the poise. And there's a rookie who's raw but intriguing. It wouldn't shock anyone if the Cowboys went into the season with just 2 QBs and tried to stash the third on the practice squad. That would mean someone with real NFL game experience might be out of job by late August. Quarterback is always a hot topic, but this year, the real drama might come from the bottom of that room, not the top. Now, let's zoom out and think about what this all means. The Cowboys are in a rare position where they've got depth almost everywhere, but not a ton of elite upside at certain spots. That creates intense competition in camp, but also makes the margins thinner than ever. If you're a fringe guy, you don't just need to be solid. You need to stand out. That could mean forcing a turnover in a preseason game, breaking a long return, pancaking a guy in joint practice, anything that gets coaches talking in a meeting room. Because once they start cutting, it moves fast. One day you're getting first-team reps, the next your locker is empty. That's just how it goes. And fans, let's not pretend we don't love the drama. Every cut, every rumor, every surprise release becomes a headline. But behind the scenes, the Cowboys, one of the NFL's most popular and successful teams, have always been under a microscope, especially when they're involved in high-profile games. The idea that there could be external forces at play, whether it's to influence outcomes or protect certain narratives, adds an entirely new layer to the scrutiny surrounding the team. As Buck's comment continues to make waves, some believe it might be a subtle critique of how the league handles its biggest matchups. Others, however, feel Buck might have been alluding to the sometimes politically charged nature of NFL games, where business interests can clash with the competitive spirit. This revelation comes at a time when the NFL has already been dealing with accusations of favoritism and manipulation, especially concerning officiating and how certain teams seemingly get preferential treatment. The Cowboys, with their massive fan base and lucrative media deals, are no strangers to controversy, and any hint of favoritism or deliberate hindrance in their quest for victory only fuels the fire of those who believe the game is more scripted than spontaneous. While Buck's comment may have been made in passing, the implications are far-reaching. It raises the question of whether the NFL is truly as pure as it claims, or if there are powers behind the scenes that shape the outcome of games before the players even step onto the field. For now, Buck's statement remains a talking point, with fans and analysts eagerly awaiting more details, or perhaps an explanation from the commentator himself. For the Dallas Cowboys and their supporters, this revelation is not just another conspiracy theory. It's a stark reminder that sometimes the game's integrity may not be as straightforward as it appears. As the NFL season progresses, all eyes will be on how the league responds to these allegations and whether they can restore faith in the fairness of their competition. For now, Though the idea that the Cowboys were under orders to lose remains a lingering, unsettling thought for fans across the nation. That's it for this update. If you enjoyed the video and want to keep receiving exclusive news about the Dallas Cowboys, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. We always look forward to your comments and opinions. See you in the next video.